And this last one is huge, and I just thought of it this morning when I was kind of preparing. Often people in shame live in fantasy to numb the pain of reality and give themselves hope. John, his whole life, from the time he was like 20, he would say, I'm going to win the lottery. And at first, we'd kind of clown around about it. And I realized, like, after 10 or 12 or 15 years of serious conversations, he's like, I'm literally going to win. He's like, he'd never say this way, but I'm going to win the lottery. And when someone would win the lottery, it's like a testimony of Jesus. Like, I'm next. I play the lottery, and I'm going to be the guy who gets the ticket, and that's going to be my ticket out of shame, right? My ticket out of poverty. I'm going to have stuff. I'm going to have nice things because I'm going to win the lottery. And I realized, especially with John, like, I would have these long conversations with him, like, that's stupid. And what I realized is that oftentimes people who have high levels of shame live in a fantasy, and that fantasy is what gives them some level of hope that someday I'll get out. And even though they're not hoping in Jesus, they're not depressed because they have this, man in white, a knight in shining armor is going to come along, and he's going to be perfect. He's not going to have any defects. He's not going to have any flaws. He's going to be not human. And he's going to knock on my door because I don't date. And he's like, had a vision from God, and he said, come here, climb up your steps, because I know your hair, you cut it years ago. And I'm going to rescue you from the castle, and it's probably never going to happen. But here's the deal. It's hard for people to be convicted of sin before they're convinced of a Savior. And sometimes we take away the fantasy before they actually have a reality of truth. I'm saying we push people deeper into shame because we go, let me pop that bubble you're living in, and they have no other bubble. I'm not saying fantasy is okay, are you with me? I'm simply saying, like, when you live in shame, fantasy is kind of the way you sustain yourself until you find a place of truth and walk out. It's important to give them a sense of hope before we destroy the fantasy, as fantasy often numbs pain to a terrible reality. I've shared the story of Brene Brown so many times in the last 4 years. I feel almost embarrassed to share it, but because I had that dream, I know I was supposed to speak on shame. And Brene Brown, if you haven't ever heard her speak, there's a 16-minute TED Talk called The Power of Vulnerability. How many of you have seen that TED Talk? Oh, good, probably half the room. That's how good the TED Talk is, right? Would everyone agree with that? That raised your hand. It's Jason sent me the link to it, my son, and he said, Dad, you need to listen to this TED Talk. And I'm like, I know he's going to ask me the next day, like, did you listen to the TED Talk? So like I clicked on the link on my phone, and I was watching the NBA game, and so I had it on, and I was watching it here, and just so I could say, yeah, I saw it, really good, and not lie, of course, because you don't want to lie. And so I got 4 minutes into this TED Talk, and it was so good, I paused the game, I went in my office and put it on the big screen, started all over, and took 16 pages of notes that night. And I was like, this is powerful. Now, I've since listened to it many other times. I probably listened to it 20, 30 times over the last 4 years. And, later on, it didn't have the same impact. But I think for where I was, you know how God gives you a right word in the right season? I think where I was is like, it was such a prophetic teaching moment for me that I think it made a huge impact on me. And I loved what she said. And for those of you that haven't seen it, and for those of you who have, I haven't watched it for over a year, so the details I have may not be exactly right, so give me a little grace. But Brene Brown she has 3 degrees, and she's in social work. I don't know why you need 3. I have none, and I've done fine. And she felt, and by the way, my understanding is and I don't know if this is accurate because it came from somebody who knows her, and I don't know her. I've never talked to her. But I heard that she wasn't a believer when she began this journey to find out this one thing. She said she wanted to figure out if there was one core reason, one thing that gives everybody meaning in life. Is there one thing? Like, it doesn't matter if you're black, white, male, female, what country you were born in, what ethnic group, what's your background, what's your education. Is there one thing that everybody is driven by? And she studied and she interviewed thousands of people. And this is what she came to. After all of her interviews, she came to this one conclusion. She said that, and I'll put it in her words, she said she learned that everyone is neurobiologically wired for connection. In my words, everybody needs relationship. Like, no matter where you are, no matter what country you live in, whether you're poor, rich, black, white, yellow, doesn't matter, everybody needs this one thing. Like, you live for this one thing. I need connection. In the midst of that, she said, this is her words, I think this is on the TED Talk. Now I've watched her so many other places, but I think it's on the TED Talk. And she said, in the midst of that, she had a breakdown, which she said was a spiritual awakening. I heard that she found the Lord through her therapist. I don't know if that's true. But from there, after those 2 years to discover what every single person is motivated by, she asked herself a question. Well, if everybody wants to be connected, how come many people are not connected? And so for the next 5 years, she did this intensive survey and studying people, again, from all over the world, studying thousands of people, surveying thousands of people, doing thousands of interviews. And she learned this thing. What is the number one reason why people are not connected? And she said, it's shame. She said, shame is the number one enemy of relationship, of connection.